I mean, it's a basic interest. It's, I suppose, in a very sort of simple way, I could say I've always been interested in how the environment, the buildings and the environment, and how the two work together. And so there's a sort of background of green sensibility, and my partner Brian would be the same. And that kind of at college, that wasn't particularly, when I was at college in the UK, that wasn't particularly taught very strongly. But both Brian and myself, we had a sort of slightly different, we know each other from student days. And he went off to work in America and had a lot of sort of green experience from working with various people like Pliny Fisk, you won't know them, but sort of hardcore green people of the United States, particularly in the West Coast. And whereas I was working in Germany in particular and picking up quite a lot of sort of the green sensibilities of German architecture. And then I worked with a company called Field and Clegg Bradley, or FCB Studios in the UK. And at the time, this was 99, 98, they were very much one of the sort of the big green practices in the UK. So very good experience. And then, so the two of us, so with my sort of more European and Brian with his more American green background, came together and started working in about 2000. So that's not really why, but that's kind of, I think you sort of find, with that sort of sensibility in the back of your mind, you start to seek out the sort of, what shall I say, the sort of the reinforcing structures, offices, professions that make you become greener and greener, if you like. So. In terms of our practice, Soul Earth, we've done consultancy in various places, as you might have seen from the website, like Vietnam or China and so on. Most of our actual work has been Ireland and a little bit in the UK, but mainly Ireland. But to answer your question, I would say I think the experience of doing consultancy in places like China, particularly China, makes you reflect quite a bit on what you're doing here, because the scale is so massively different. We were involved in a new town in China, and at the end of, I think it's called the end of the new Silk Road or whatever, it's a huge port. The city is massive. The area that they decided to make into a green city was probably the size of the centre of Dublin. And yet that was just a small part of the overall city. And you go, my God, they're in a sense, what's quite humbling about it is that they are very, they're working on such a huge scale that certainly in Ireland, perhaps less so in France, but in Ireland you're going, what are we doing here? Whatever we do here, it's very small scale. Whereas China, they can make such a huge difference to how they decide to, do they want to seriously green the whole city, or do they just want to make a token gesture? And I suppose our experience from that project was a little bit, it's great they're doing it, but it's actually such a small part of a much bigger enterprise that actually they're maybe only just making a sort of slightly gestural approach to greening their infrastructure. Maybe a little unfair, don't take that bit, but certainly that was our experience from it. I think generally in Ireland, what I found, certainly from working in Germany, if you like, on mainland Europe, that Ireland has tended to be a little bit behind the rest of Europe, particularly sort of, I don't know about France, I don't have much experience in France, but certainly behind Germany in terms of its approach to sustainability. It hasn't had a great culture of that, I suppose, in the building world recently. And but it's catching up. It's actually caught up, I think, in many respects. Now the building regulations here are actually quite rigorous and quite strong. So it's certainly very much part of the building culture now, whereas it wasn't 15 years ago. And that, I suppose, that's the most positive thing about the last sort of 15, 16 years, is seeing the change from sort of doing Daintree, which, as I was saying before, seemed like it was quite an adventurous building, whereas it's now would be relatively normal in the building context, the building culture of Ireland. So that's a good thing.
Would you like to change something in this building today?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah,
like
quite
what?
a lot. Quite a lot. I mean, I think I suppose that there's a couple of things in terms of the energy. One could do. We probably wouldn't increase the insulation of the building, but one would start to look at heat recovery ventilation system, perhaps sort of. So what's that? Mechanical ventilation heat recovery, MVHR, in the apartments or in this space, so that the heat that we generate in the office could be usefully, or in the cafe, could be usefully used to heat the water in the rest of the building, or the radiator system in the rest of the building. That sort of thing, which we would have liked to have done if we'd had the money originally, we would certainly like to do now if there were the possibility. I think just in terms constructionally, I think like it's a timber frame building, and I suppose one of the big lessons about timber frame for me is that you actually should try and shed the water off the building as quickly as you can. And it's quite a complex roof structure because we wanted to have different experiences, different terraces, etc. So that is good in terms of the concept, but in terms of constructing it, it makes it quite tricky. Draining the water off the building is an awkward thing to do, and I think we could have made it easier, thinking about if we'd known we were going to be here as architects 10 years later, and every time there's a leak in the building, someone knocks on our door and says, "Hey, what's the problem up here?" You go, "Oh, not again." So, that's the interesting thing. You're involved in the maintenance of the building, so you get to understand what works and what doesn't work. So yeah, there's lots of little things. I think the big things we probably wouldn't have changed, but there's lots of little things we probably could have done better. Yeah, we probably all have our sort of individual heroes, if you like, but I think, like in terms of thinking about more radical designers, we would certainly have looked towards people like Rural Studio. I don't know if you know them, from Alabama, from the States, and they, in terms of their reuse of materials, and their inventiveness, they're very good. They're very exciting. And then in terms of the sort of the more professional aspects of building green architecture, I would certainly look to my old company, Field and Clegg, in the UK, who have been doing green buildings for a long time. And it's interesting to watch how they have refined their architecture down. They're not, I wouldn't say they're a big practice now. Not every building is high-end green, but when they do that, you can see that they've really refined their work. So they're always interesting to see how they've developed over 20, 30 years now. I quite like Joachim Ebler, who is a German architect, who's a bit freaky in his architecture style. It's a little bit all over the place sometimes. But certain things like the Öku House in Frankfurt are very much an old building now, 20 years probably, but that is it's like Daintree, but it's even more radical than Daintree, and it's got a wider mix of people and so on, and but it's quite a good role model of that sort of social architectural mix in the city. And then I think probably Brian, more than myself, would probably look back to some of the American guys, like some of the older ones, like Buckminster Fuller, just from his sort of foresight and vision of technology in the world and how technology actually could be very sustainable.
Sorry.
and then people like Pliny Fisk, who I mentioned before, who he worked for a while, who's quite obscure industrial designer, architect, but really thinking very, very deeply about sustainability and circular thinking and reusing and low energy consumption, all of that. So yeah, there are a whole load of them actually. Airfield, actually, this one I was talking about earlier on. Yeah, I think so. It's partly because it's probably the most refined architecturally building or set of buildings, because there's 4 or 5 of them there that we've done. Partly because it was a very good mixture of client and architect or design team generally, as in their values about sustainability and the land were very much what we were thinking as well. So it was quite a good marriage of the two sides, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. We've been lucky on the whole, but I think because most of our clients, they come to us because they think a bit like us. I think it kind of represents probably the, partly because it's one of our more recent buildings, but it probably represents our thesis of sustainability in terms of building and landscape and sites generally. This is like the baby. This is the baby.
Okay.
In many respects, it's actually one of the bigger buildings we've done probably, but it's. I mean, it was literally designed, I think, sort of 1999, 2000. So it was right at the very beginning of the practice, and although it didn't get built until, as I said, 2004, 2005, let's call it the baby. It was the incubator of quite a lot of different ideas, and we haven't done so much housing since, but of this sort of scale. But the ideas of material usage, the ideas of low energy, the ideas of sort of circular economy have got into Airfield or into Castle Espy or any of these other projects that you see around.